My name's May, this is Elham. So during our residency, we kind of explored in like a slightly dreamy way this project which we started thinking about here called The Plunder, which takes as its starting point the fact that right now in Syria and Iraq, as you've probably heard, there's this kind of mass destruction and looting of things which are not just Syrian and Iraqi cultural heritage, but really kind of effectively like things that belong to us all as like a human history. And kind of the thing that like struck us when we were reading about this was the fact, kind of this like repeated statistic in lots of the news, which was that ISIS was being funded, was funding itself. The other way around. So the second source of ISIS's funding was in fact the sale of antiquities. And so it became like a bit of a question about why they're so valuable and how could you subvert that value? How could you kind of challenge that industry that only exists because there is a demand, and that demand isn't, that demand is in England and in places kind of at this neck of the woods, and what might be a good way of like thinking about that world differently.
So we're very much in development with this project. Part of what we're trying to do is connect us here to that story there and try to bring people closer to that reality to understand. I think a lot of our questions around value and understanding value kind of be thinking about the stories and connecting, bringing those objects into a more personal space. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is around that.
And just like a tiny bit of background, so what I normally work on in a company called Anagram is kind of immersive experiences that use kind of documentary content as its starting point, but does kind of more than that, or like does it differently, which is about kind of how does the person coming to the story actually embody that story? How do you kind of, instead of feeling like you're experiencing something that's other to you, kind of do something which means that you're very connected to that. So like a more tangible example is a project, I guess a theatre show that I worked on now, kind of last year, called Door into the Dark, which was about what it means to be lost. And you as a participant, it's for one person at a time, are blindfolded and listen to people's stories stories about being lost while you are effectively getting lost. So that's like a little bit of kind of like an area of play that we wanted to explore.
The idea of immersion and kind of understanding through experiencing. So what we're going to go through is some of the different thoughts that we've had around objects and the meanings. So we'll start with this. Many of you might have already seen this video.
You've seen this video? So what happens is this falls over and everybody hits it with a hammer.
Okay, well, it's quite... So this video was circulated last week, and you can see, actually it's quite a long video. They're going, this is IS or ISIS going around the museum and smashing up these objects. And there was an immediate kind of outcry at this. And then the realization that actually these weren't the original objects. They were actually copies of those objects, or a lot of different experts were saying, well, the real objects wouldn't have been so easy to smash. But the question is, does it make a difference that it's a copy or not? The act is still what it is, and actually they've already gotten the value that they wanted to get from this, because the image was, the shock image was probably what they wanted, and the reaction was what they wanted. So this was one of our starting points, the idea of real versus copy, and does that matter, and what does that mean?
And what's the difference between the real thing and the copy? So kind of one of our early ideas was, what if we set up a manufacturing agency where we make copies of these things and sell them to ISIS so they can smash them? Like, does that actually kind of fulfill everybody's requirements? But also kind of that thought about what if we were to, I mean, effectively, not, you know, kind of beyond the kind of destruction, you know, the actual trade means that, like, effectively there's like an increasingly long list of objects of cultural importance which are missing, which we may or may not ever see again. Could we manufacture those? Could everybody in the world with access to a hackerspace or a 3D printer kind of be part of an action to make these objects from scratch and somehow kind of flood the world of antiquities with copies in some kind of pretense that would bring down the value of the artifacts?
But then there's also the question of, does it actually bring down value, or does it bring value up because it's creating new visibility for it and actually playing into, well, changing value in a way that we hadn't intended if we go down that route?
So we played a little bit with 3D printing and making versions of artifacts from scratch using kind of our imagination. And I don't have a sample with me right now, but we have some upstairs. And there's obviously something like a little bit ridiculous in that. Anybody who's seen like a 3D printed object, which you can see shortly, there's just something kind of massively unsatisfying about holding a 3D printed object. It does not have kind of that special something that says time and space and history. And our question kind of like, what is that thing? Can we just make that thing? Can like we use technology not just to kind of make objects, but also to make that magical thing that we as human beings like emotionally connect to objects? And it's a bit of Walter Benjamin.
So this is something that Walter Benjamin talks about quite a lot, the idea of the aura. You can see it through the quotes. You know, what he wanted to do was smash the system, thinking about reproduction of objects.
So the genuineness of a thing is the quintessence of everything about it since its creation that can be handed down from its material duration to the historical witness that it bears. So we figured that was what was missing when we tried to recreate these objects using 3D printed plastic. So the idea that kind of as something exists in the world over time, it's like wrapped in a kind of emotional flypaper, and like stories and experiences stick to it like flies, and that when you get the object and you know that it doesn't have that flypaper, it's dissatisfying. So then our question was, Alhan will say something and then I'll say something.
So you probably all know about the terracotta armies in Xi'an in China. And there is a question mark about whether, well, the word in Chinese for copying and learning is the same thing. So there's a question mark about whether these are the originals or are they copies, or does it matter? And for example, that when these were for the very first time lent to another museum, there was also the question of were the originals or the copies lent? Did it matter? Did people's reactions seeing them? If you've ever seen them, what's incredible is how vast and amazing these armies are. They're really, it's the story that's incredible. Does it matter that it's a copy or not? And are we ever seeing the real thing, or has anyone ever really seen it, or are these all copies? We don't know.
Big questions. So our experiment then was, yes, to detach the fly paper and the flies and put them somewhere else. And kind of, I guess, so this is a picture of a postcard from Damascus, and I guess that action of like sending someone the story of an experience as opposed to the experience is something that we kind of do in an everyday way when we send postcards. We're like, here's something to remind you of our something, kiss, kiss, kiss. And that's kind of the way that we do it. We kind of do it in a way that feels like more visceral, like part of that story experience. So, but how can we also make it feel like it's personal and connected to you? When we were doing a little bit of research, we came across the Red List on the Interpol website. So the Red List is a list of objects deemed to be significant and valuable that are missing or kind of believed stolen. And Interpol gave a little definition definition of what significant meant, and significant was a significant object is something integral to the identity of a nation. And I thought that was interesting to think about, like, the identity of a nation being connected to, you know, bits of pottery and clay and wood and stone. And what about our identity as people? Like, are we forming our identity as people with bits and bobs? And made me think of the pebbles I have in like a little bowl on my dressing table, and the fact that everybody actually collects those objects. So
that was kind of the starting point of what we've developed, and that you can see upstairs, which is very much a pilot to get a sense of how people interact with the objects and experience them, and can exchange stories and understand other people's stories.
So our little kind of user test, which is the Cabinet of Lost Things, which is upstairs, is stories that people have recorded about things that they really cared about, they just can't find anymore. So there are kind of the slightly related versions of those things. They're obviously not the real thing because the things are actually lost. And you can hear the stories of the actual object connected to the particular objects. And we also kind of invite you guys to find an object that like triggers a memory and record a little story about the memory that it triggers and email it to us, and we'll kind of put it into the system so that somebody else who finds the object can also hear the story about the memory that you put to it.
And so in this way, it's thinking about objects, stories, memories, and trying to connect it back, in a sense, to what's missing from Syria. It's not, and connecting that to how people shape identity and understand their personal histories or their national histories, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess our question is, what is the difference between, you know, the plastic version plus the story, as opposed to the actual real thing? And how can we kind of creatively fill those gaps? Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Mayor Allen.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Just quickly, you've touched on one of the points that I think is sort of quite relevant to this whole conversation about the internet, which is the question of authorship in a way. If you address that very much in your project at all, you know, what is an author and what makes an author, and what makes a thing authored, so to speak.
It's interesting. It comes back to the idea within these Chinese words of learning or copying. It does really question that idea of authorship. Does it, you know, like we were talking about brands that kind of get mass reproduced, and then who owns the, you know, then it changes the value of the brand. Does the brand then reposition itself? Has it lost something? Has it gained something? Does it matter? We're on the, that's basically how we've thought about it up till now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because in a way it gives agency to how I can affect for example, like one of the things that we were talking about was how like the Burberry brand kind of got somewhat subverted by groups of people that Burberry didn't really want to sell to, identifying with their brand. So in a way, kind of like telling the story about Burberry for them in a way that kind of contrasted massively with the kind of PR machine that was trying to tell a different kind of story. And so that's suggesting that there's kind of like layers where I can tell, you know, I can kind of like add the layers of meaning. And in a way, that the idea that, you know, what kind of, the story that's kind of implicit, that isn't like necessarily clear enough to kind of challenge, is that there's particular value to these objects because they say something or other about who we are. And the idea that like we could say, that we could kind of reclaim what is important. Is it kind of like the actual thing, or like just the story is important? It doesn't need to be attached to the object. Yeah, so like the kind of like the possibility of that question means that there's agency for other people to be involved in that conversation. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, it's interesting. Thank you.
Just for clarity, my name's Neil Cargill, writer-director, and I'm the one with the pencil. And this is Simon, who's a musician and sound designer. And so what we've been working on, just very briefly, and it will be brief because with our project being an audio one, the bulk of the demonstration will be this afternoon. Simon's got music performance this afternoon, 3:30, I believe.
That's right. Get your earplugs in.
Yep. Wait for the moment when he goes up the stairs with the cape on and I look at all. It's the best bit. Just very briefly, what the project is a long-running audio drama which is going to be delivered as a weekly podcast. And the thinking behind it is that, well, if I tell you where the inspiration came from for this, we have to go back to the early 70s, when I was only that high. And I used to listen every night to this little transistor radio to foreign radio stations that were coming in from Moscow, Cairo, Radio Berlin. And it was these mysterious transmissions from countries that I had little knowledge of. I didn't really know why they were broadcasting, and it started off a fascination with these mysterious transmissions, which started a little bit worrying because I used to send letters to places like Radio Berlin, and I started sending letters back quite regularly, which was all very exciting when you're a young teenager. What I didn't realise was that this was going to come back and bite me years later when I started working for the BBC. And I discovered that good old Room 105 had a file with my name on it, the Christmas tree marked on the front, which was a sign that this was a possible subversive and something that had to be watched. And it was all because I'd been contacting these mysterious radio stations. Anyway, that idea resurfaced in the past couple of years. I started talking to Simon about it, and we've developed it into the starting point of this long-running audio drama, which kicks off really with this chap. He's a shortwave radio enthusiast called Mr. Cuttings, who already has started receiving these mysterious transmissions. He doesn't know where they're coming from, why they're trying to contact him, or are they trying to contact one of us? We don't know. But what he does know is that these transmissions are coming from an abandoned amusement park somewhere. He doesn't know where. That's the starting point of where we pick up the story. And while I'll be doing the drama side, it's Simon who'll be constructing the actual sound. It's a quite complex soundscape that's been created.
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the reasons we started thinking about this idea, and we've worked together quite a lot on BBC productions, radio productions, and we've also pitched our own ideas and been quite frustrated with the lack of room for experimentation and taking risks for the BBC. And I suppose we wanted to explore other ways of making our own interesting work that I suppose takes those risks, use different approaches and sounds, has the room to be more experimental, and maybe mix art as well as radio, and bring the art into the radio. And I suppose when we heard about the Platforms event, initially we were just thinking, well, we've got this great idea, how can we fund it? How can we use the internet to fund it? Let's go and do this thing. And then through the process, obviously we've discovered a whole lot more about using the internet to tell stories. I think that's been the best thing about the Platforms project. And now we're at the end of it, we just feel in a much better position to kind of go out and not only get funding, but use the internet to tell this quite interesting story in a different way.
In a way, what we want to do is, rather than, for example, if it was a conventional BBC radio drama, it would be scheduled for the afternoon of a particular day. It would have a 45-minute slot. This we want to sort of drip feed into the ether, and let it spread to begin with, almost like a virus. And that we wanted to do that. We didn't know how, but that's one thing we've learned from Platforms is all the various new storytelling techniques that we can use online to actually start spreading this idea so that it builds its own momentum. And it will be constructed, if that's the right word, as a long-running drama where you can actually join us at any point, and there will be opportunities to recap and so on. It's not something that you have to stick with from beginning to end. Which again poses its own problems, but a lot of those problems will be solved by some of the innovative techniques offered by online platforms nowadays. But a lot of it will make a little bit more sense this afternoon with Simon's performance, which will give you a taste of the way we're thinking, not necessarily the way it will eventually sound, but the way we're thinking at the moment. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. So before I begin, I was once told by a really good friend of mine and a mentor that every project starts with a set of needs, or just one need. And your project doesn't really begin until you take your first risk. And it's really important to remember the first risk in your project so that you can always come back and remember those initial needs, so that 10 years down the line you haven't just wandered off trying to fulfill some other needs. But anyway, just remember that in this little presentation. So my name is Sophie Gibbelin, and I'm the director and curator of Collective Gallery. But I've been here for the last however many months, 3-4 months, working on a new project called Nice to Meet You. And so Nice to Meet You is hopefully going to be a global online platform which introduces UK artists to artists all over the world, but in the form of visual dialogues. So Collective Gallery is my current baby, my first project that I started 18 months ago when I left my degree in Brighton University. I studied music and visual art. And after my degree, I saw a lot of my peers decide to not go into creative job roles because they believed that the money was poor. And people who did go into creative job roles were really badly underpaid and really badly overworked. So I started a collective which would crowdfund on Kickstarter and use empty high street shops to transform into galleries where we would sell and exhibit our artwork, and we would give free talks and workshops to the public. And we used this model 3 times over in the last 18 months to support early career practitioners. And our needs in this project were about risk-taking, collaboration, professionalism, resourcefulness, and entrepreneurship. And we've done about 8 exhibitions in the last 18 months because of it. We've helped about 80 different artists in the city. But there came a point recently, about 6 months ago, where I realized that those needs that I had set out to achieve had actually been fulfilled, which incredibly freed up my brain to start a new project with a new set of needs, which was Nice to Meet You. So the needs I'm trying to fulfill are ambition, and inspiring ambition in early career practitioners, global collaboration, and just exploring that, and trying to really embrace what the internet has to offer us today, the locality that it offers us today. An international understanding, and saying to early career practitioners, you are a global collaborator if you're on the internet speaking to other people. And what it means to not just be someone living in Brighton and Hove or the UK, but someone who is collaborating with artists all around the world, and what that does to someone's resume and confidence. So I said earlier that this project is about visual dialogues. In Collective Gallery, at the moment, I picture interview artists. So I would ask you, an artist, 10 questions, and you would reply visually. But with Nice to Meet You, I want artists from 2 different locations to ask each other a question, and then reply visually. So here's an example. Harry Mills from the UK asked Ed J. Brown from Germany, if you could ask one question to someone living on the other side of the world, what would it be? And this was his answer. So then Ed J. Brown from Germany asked Harry Mills from the UK a question. If you could live anywhere, probably ... And this is his answer. So these are visual dialogues, and they're starting to talk to one another. And our plan is to have a platform where artists are speaking to one another all over the world, and in 3 years' time, we hope to set up a global exhibition. I don't know how that will work just yet, but that's a mission. So we haven't launched yet, but we hope that our first visual dialogues and our first set of introductions will be between Brighton and Barcelona, because the girl who helped me realise this project, is from Barcelona, and so we're going to use this connection we already have. And those bees look so beautiful together. From the same mentor that helped me realise risks and needs, he also told me this awesome quote, and I think this is like a tennis player, but it's such a great quote. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, which is kind of like bizarre because we're always doing that all the time anyway, without even trying, but it's always nice for me to realise this quote when I'm starting a new project to get started. So anyway, ask me anything. There's some zines upstairs which have the story of my transition from collector to nice to meet you, bless you. And you can just have one, they're for free. So go ahead and take one upstairs and feel free to follow me on these sites. Thank you very much.
Thanks.